Welcome to the discussion, The Future of Network Infrastructure, Secure, Software-Defined, and Automated, sponsored by Leidos on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today, Stephen Rice, the Deputy CIO at the Homeland Security Department, Beth Cloran, the Deputy CIO at the General Services Administration, Ira Barron, the Chief Technology Officer at the Office of Justice Programs in the Justice Department, and Angie Heisey, the President of the Civil Group at Leidos. Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you.
Let me set some context for our discussion today. When it comes to federal agency networks, over the last few years, we've heard a lot of analogies around changing the tire of a car while driving 60 miles per hour down the road. I think maybe a better analogy would be from the movie Speed with Keanu Reeves, where if the bus dropped below 60 miles per hour, a bomb would go off. Well, we don't want to over-dramatize network modernization, but we all know without the network, any organization, public or private, will have a hard time doing anything. But no matter the comparison you want to use, agencies are in the middle of both an evolution and a revolution when it comes to their networks. First, the growing demand on the network is forcing agencies to continue down the road around the evolution of how services are delivered. This is why approaches like cloud and now managed services, you guys remember managed services, it's a concept maybe from the early 2000s. They're more popular than ever. Agencies spending on cloud computing services surged to $4.1 billion in 2018, which is about 9% higher than in 2017, according to an analysis from Bloomberg Government. Second, there's the need for better security, better data access and management, and the expectation and desire for emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's all forcing agencies to rethink how their network needs of today are need to morph into the needs of tomorrow. That include things like software-defined networking and more software and less hardware. We know the move to the cloud and the implementation of SDN are continually a work in progress. There's no beginning, there's no end, just a lot of small steps, which includes things like data center consolidation, application rationalization. So how do you keep that bus moving at 60 miles per hour so the network can support your mission needs? Well, once again, that's where our guests come in. So Steve, let me turn to you. You guys at the Homeland Security Department are in the middle of a huge network modernization effort. I know you guys have put out some contracts, some RFIs, some RFPs. There's a lot of buzz going around. So give me the 50,000-foot view, if you will, of your network modernization. What's it look like today and where's it going?
Thank you, Jason. All of these strategies that we're discussing, whether it's cloud modernization, our current data center constructs, as well as our network, are all interrelated. As we look at the network modernization, we look at it from the ability to leverage the existing contract vehicles from the General Services Administration. The new vehicles available to us were EIS. And what that forced us to do is kind of look at what does modernization mean for DHS. We have a series of core networks we refer to as OneNet, which is the interconnection of all of the DHS components. And then all the separate components each operate mission networks to support each area of their responsibility. What this required for modernization is defining what a consolidated outlook would look like of how do we have an outcome where we are much easier to support our infrastructure, being able to bring us much closer to the edge of the cloud, and also allow us to define what modernization looks like for new technologies, new operations, as well as new contract structures to be able to define and lower cost over time for DHS.
And a lot of this network modernization piece is, as you said, so interrelated. So is the DHS headquarters where you sit connected to the DHS components too, in terms of how to make sure that everyone's at least on the same road, maybe not the same path, but at least the same road with lots of guardrails?
Absolutely. DHS, where I sit at DHS headquarters, is an operating component. At the end of the day, we have multiple components that have to come together to understand how are we going to communicate amongst each other. Also, how are we going to transport data between the clouds? And also really defining what that cloud strategy looks like. In the department's view, we have primarily been on-premise. We have two primary data centers. The contracts are co-termed and lapsing in June of 2020. But also recognizing that the cloud is not going to be a single experience for the department. It's not going to be a single cloud. We're going to be a multi-cloud hybrid architecture. What that means, multiple clouds, hybrid also computing with some applications that we choose to have remaining on-premise. But the backbone of this, Jason, is understanding that data has to transport securely across the missions, whether that's between headquarters within each of the components or all the way down to each of the mission spaces, whether that's ports of entry, whether those are airports, or whether those are touch points for the U.S. Coast Guard as well. So bringing the components together to recognize the compute and storage model and the transported data across the components has to be revisited. We've done a pretty good job of being able to define that amongst each of the components. We've sent out a series of RFIs, which we've had a tremendous response. We're going through those questions now to be able to give us a much more fuller developed RFP when that comes out later. But I think we're on a great course to be able to redefine and modernize how we compute, store, and transport data for the department.
Beth, GSA is on a different path in some ways. You guys have been on the modernization for quite a while. Give me a sense of where GSA is today when it comes to network modernization.
Great. So thank you, Jason. I'm happy to be here and discuss this important topic. So for us, we have actually modernized our network, but we have opportunities for enhancement and expansion beyond what we have. And I think one of the things that all agencies have to think about is infrastructure, and especially your network, become your foundational transport of information, data, and access to systems. And so you really have to understand how that needs to move throughout the ecosystem as you're looking at your infrastructure and especially the network. One of the things that I think we're going to talk about today is the cloud. And so as you look at the systems moving out of your environments, moving out of your data centers and moving to other locations, that means the access points and how you're getting information to your data and systems needs to change. And that's really how we're looking at modernizing our systems. Not only have we expanded how many sites we have, but we also understand a lot of the information that GSA has is actually accessed by the public or by other federal agencies. And you need to understand those customers and where they're accessing your information and build the network to be able to dynamically shift to meet those demands, be able to surge as you move forward, to self-heal so that you don't have not only breakdowns, which ends up happening, that somewhere there's going to be a failure, but the worst part is degradation of service. So it may not actually go down, but you have the impact of that. So how are you building that robustness throughout the system, having the redundancy, the transparency, and the duplication of multipathing? And so that's really what we're looking at.
And GSA is in an interesting position because you guys have internal customers, which is a huge agency, maybe not as big as DHS, but 18,000 or so people that is spread across the country. But then you also, as you mentioned, the external customers, all the contractors who want to come to your network, and then citizens who want to come to your network. And then that comes back to that robustness and the ability to understand what the customer's needs are and surge as needed. How does that play into that network modernization strategy?
So it does. So think about, we understand that, there are numerous users of things such as login.gov, stamp.gov, or GSA Advantage, just for example, or even FedBizOps.
Oh, don't say that word.
Okay, we won't say that
sorry.
word. That's okay. But realize that, those are all external, right? And so, but you also have internal capabilities and systems that are behind, that are what are traditionally out on the internet. And so we actually have to understand that path, where we need to put those securities, to Steve's point of how we actually know where to put the right security, understand what we're doing the authentication. And so that's why for us, as we start thinking about EIS and our path forward, it's got to be around, a little bit around zero trust networking, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so you need to know who is coming into your system, what do you know about them, what kind of device are they using to access your system, and where are they coming from. Because you have to start and build that trust up over time, and so we're building that into our network as we move forward.
All right. Ira, let's shift to Justice Department. I've heard Joe Klimovich, the CIO of the Justice Department, speak many times, and his two big things are, I think you guys have reduced almost all your data centers. You're down to just a handful, if not just a couple, and shared services are big. So how does that affect what the Office of Justice Programs is doing around your network modernization?
Great, thank you for the question. If I may, first I'd like to comment, because I'm still relatively new to the federal government. I continue to be impressed with how federal IT is not only meeting the mission of delivering to the American public, but simultaneously protecting the assets of the American public. It's really, I hadn't thought of it until hearing the discussion from the two of you, that very interesting dichotomy in that our objective is to make assets that belong to our public available to the public, while also protecting them in ways to ensure that they don't get corrupted. So excellent, thank you for all that you're doing. In large part, I piggyback on much of what you do, so great. Excellent, thank you. Let's start with data center consolidation. Before joining the federal government, I was contracting JMD. I was party to some of the activities around the consolidation of the data centers. Went down from, I forget what the initial number was, but certainly in the tens, if not nearly 100, and down to 3. So that was very significant across all of Department of Justice. And it did impact Office of Justice programs in that many of our quote unquote on-prem workloads were running in data centers that were closing. We took it as an opportunity to move as much as we could, our workloads that we could, out to the cloud. Some of our legacy systems, frankly, didn't lend themselves well to that, so we were stuck with finding rack space in Sterling or elsewhere. The network architecture for us, of course, had to change because the location of many of our services was running in a different facility. As well, our hybrid environment is complicated by the fact that we piggyback on the Department of Justice network. So Office of Justice Programs is a tenant within Department of Justice network. And as we've been expanding out to our cloud environments, it's meant a continuing negotiation and learning experience for Office of Justice Programs, Department of Justice, and in some cases, even the vendors, whether it's the cloud service provider, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and certainly some of the cloud service providers resident there. We have stipulations that say that all traffic has to run through the Department of Justice network, and that's not always an easy nut to crack, especially when we're thinking about throughput, scalability, stability, redundancy. So, efforts for modernization have a couple of dimensions to them. One is to piggyback on what Department of Justice is doing. They themselves are moving away from physical implementations of trusted internet connections, moving out to cloud access points. Excellent. Better scalability, more redundancy, et cetera. And again, our network architecture is going to have to change for that reason. Our network, our virtual network, expands to include systems that were built on behalf of Office of Justice Programs. We're a grant funding agency. Many of our grants turned into websites, calculatic engines, analysis tools that were built by outside parties and then made available to the public because they were publicly funded. Because we have an obligation to secure them, of course, that created some very significant challenges for us. And the strategy as of 2.5, 3 years ago was to lift and shift as many of them as possible into our environment behind the tick. And largely we would establish them in a cloud environment. So whether they were some sort of physical implementation elsewhere, we established a cloud infrastructure to move them. It's resulted in an extraordinary diversity of different architectural models. The network infrastructure among the components of all these services, these applications, became very complex. And it's forced us to start thinking about abstracting how some of those services should be centralized into virtual private clouds for particular purposes, whether it's about security, whether it's about build chains, whether it's about whatever it may be. So our strategy is to standardize that, migrate what we can to the standard architecture within our cloud environment. And then, as I say, ride the wave of modernization through JUTNet, through the Department of Justice network. And for us, it's get out of the hardware business as much as possible. We're resident in a couple of the Department of Justice data centers. We also had a relatively significant data center in our headquarters building downtown. We've moved almost all of the workloads out, and remaining is really only what we need to run the building and manage connectivity.
I want to bring Angie into the discussion. React a little bit to what you're hearing from not just the panel, but what you're seeing from your clients, the network modernization piece. It seems like everyone, as I said, is at a different part, but the direction is fairly clear.
Yeah, I think it's fairly consistent. So we have the great honor of working with a large set of different clients, and everyone is on their own path relative to their digital transformation journey and how they are trying to maximize and make their organizations most efficient. And at Leidos, we do the same thing for our own organization. But I kind of categorize where everybody's at and what they're focused on in maybe 3 areas. So we've heard about cybersecurity. Security is paramount, I think, for any organization and certainly any federal agency. The next would be automation. There's so much that we can automate and make all those repeatable tasks, not only in a way that uses software to be able to do it automatically for us, but it really improves not only the turn time for customers, but their customer experience. And then the next thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is really preparing for the future, whether it be 5G or what's next, right? Technology is constantly changing and evolving, and we know that while we have a series of projects we're all working on now to make the users much more productive, much more efficient, that there's going to be new technologies that come around in the next couple of years that will have us adjust what those paths are.
I'm interested when you go through the three areas of cyber automation and preparing for the future. Just based on our conversation so far, it seems like most agencies are probably in that cyber world. Let me upgrade my network, let me make changes because I need better cybersecurity, let me get off the legacy. Are you seeing, is that what you're seeing too, or are you starting to see some of that bleed into automation?
So a little bit of both. So I will tell you, everyone has been very focused on cybersecurity, and I don't think that that's going to end anytime soon. And it's about maximizing the cyber resources and dollars that you have to be able to best defend the networks and the applications that you have. We are seeing a lot being done in automation, whether it be around SecDevOps, so that you can more quickly develop and create applications for the end users, or if it's something more like robotic process automation, where you can implement RPA to take tasks that your team and people are doing today and be able to automate them so you can use those resources in a much better and more effective and, quite honestly, more challenging work for them way to help the enterprise.
There's a lot to talk about RPA, but we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about automation. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Future of Network Infrastructure, Secure, Software Defined, and Automated, sponsored by Leidos on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.